We're back
Hello.
again. We're back again. We're back again. So today's conversation has been a bit of a focused musing of mine this week. So I've been thinking about the schools I've been working with. Some schools I've worked with for 6 years plus, some schools not so long, but I was really looking at each of their journeys and really plotting where I think they need to go next. And in that thought process, I started to think about the new framework that's coming out with Ofsted. It is meaty, very meaty. I was at a governor's meeting last night and we went through one section, which was the curriculum section. It is meaty and it's also very prescriptive as well. I've done a little bit of a look in throughout the inclusion one. That's a little bit of reading over my holidays to get underneath it more. But actually, it's quite prescriptive in the sense of if you do not tick every box in secure, you may end up not being secure, and that could impact the whole inspection process. And I started to think about the schools that I work with and the things that may make them secure or not secure when it comes to inclusion. And it just really brought up a lot of questions about starting points for me, about the school starting points around all of the things we know of as well. Funding, we can never take funding off the table. That's a big issue right now. Expertise that we have in our schools, structures, area differences, local authority, all the beautiful things, right? I call them beautiful things, but all the things that come together that impact how schools run. And I was just starting to really think about this framework and how the starting points of each schools may be taken into account or not. And actually, how are schools going to be able to support themselves through that journey to feel secure? Because they could be secure in absolutely everything else, but because the inclusion bit may be relatively new to some of them, they may not find themselves as secure in that area. And it just really made me think about starting points. What can I be doing to support my schools to be more secure in inclusion? What do you think is going to be the picture around that? Maybe not from the framework point of view, but the idea of inclusion itself.
Well, I think just coming back to that idea of different starting points, I find it absolutely fascinating that, and this isn't meant to be sort of slagging people off too much, but it's just the nature of how things are in education. But I could go and visit a school or meet with, do a video call with a school, and the type of conversations that they're still having might have been something that I was having. And this isn't to say sort of how great was I 20 years ago, but literally 15
Okay.
years ago, we were having that conversation in school about how we need to change these things because they're a bit outdated or they're a bit,
Yeah.
it's sort of fascinating and concerning at the same time, like that. Oh, wow, are we still there? Like, is this still
Yeah.
like we haven't um, we haven't sort of moved on from this conversation yet in this particular school or this particular area.
Yeah.
Um, and I think some of that comes down to the sort of whether schools have previously been in a good position to make change, and making change can be really daunting
Yeah.
and is often something that you put off until maybe you're in a more secure position. And especially, I imagine, if you're in a school that has previously been like requires improvement or had some real challenges around staffing or lots of changes in senior leadership, and it's never
Yeah.
been a good time to actually make a
Yeah.
change. And that can be like small and medium sized changes, let alone like really big changes about the way that we do things. So I think for a kickoff, that starting point thing is really uh, interesting. And it's, I mean, the way the different approaches that can be, especially in the specialist environments, different approaches that can be sort of adopted can be wildly different. I don't know
Yeah.
if you see that in the sort of schools you visit.
Most definitely. I think to take one of your points about it's quite hard. I think it really does take courageous leadership. Now, I think all leaders in education are courageous. It's one of the hardest jobs to do, right? But actually, it takes a special kind of, I'm going to keep pushing the boundaries here to see what my community, my school, my leadership, the capacity of my school is going to manage. And I think the best schools that I work with around inclusion, and don't get me wrong, they're all very good schools. All the schools I work with have got an inclusive eye. They want it because if they did it, they wouldn't be commissioning me, right? But there are some that have got this extra oomph behind them that have just gone, you know what, we're going all in. So it's the commitment piece as well that I think is really strong when you see a school that's really pushed on inclusion. Now that's not without its challenges, especially in the landscape of reduced funding and all of this. So this is not a negative conversation in that respect at all. But what I do find is in terms of leadership that just says if we're going to do this, we're going to go all in. We're going to do the resourcing. We're going to find the right expertise. We're going to make sure all the staff know what we're doing. We're going all in. And I find that some places that I go in and out of are not ready to go all in. So they're ready to start something. So they may be starting a resource space, a different space in the school or things like that. But they're not yet ready to go actually. But everything we have in school, our culture is going to go behind this. And I think that makes a big difference. I think it makes a big difference if we're kind of going, we're going to test something here, but we're not going to go, oh, we're going to embrace it. And I think that's part of the journey of inclusion is that our schools have to fully embrace it from leadership to reception to cleaners to the whole, idea of a school environment has to embrace the idea of what inclusion is going to mean. And I think that's something to really hold on to as leaders.
Yeah, I think sometimes I consider it a bit like ripping a plaster off, like if you've got something really, if you know something's going to be tough and you sort of resist, and then you like saying, well, we're going to dip our toe in, we're going to sort of have to, but that doesn't necessarily raise quality very much when we're sort of just, we're going to take some of Emma's advice and we're going to use some of it, but we're not ready to jump fully in with it. And then and obviously, like with anything with children, it's sort of like, I don't know, when you're teaching a toddler to do something, sometimes you just got to take the nappy off, or you've just got, and it's going to be nasty for a
Yeah,
couple of weeks.
let them about it. Yeah,
But, uh,
real. That's
but like,
real.
we may as well get on with this because we're just pushing it down the line otherwise.
Most
Um, and
definitely, that is
obviously, there
real.
are extreme circumstances where
Oh,
actually our focus needs to be safeguarding for the
oh
next
gosh, yeah.
year because we're in a really bad place with something really, really desperately important. But more often than not, I think that courageousness and the bravery is what is important. And as a team, if you know that in 6 months' time things are going to be loads better, I'd say most school teams would be willing to um, go through the short-term pain. If this is a longer-term solution that's going to be much better for our children and much better for us as a team as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think sometimes that idea of it being quite painful needs to be challenged a little bit as well, because what I find is that if we can be incremental, so again, knowing the starting point. So if we know our starting point as a school, actually we've got gaps here in staffing understanding, or we've got gaps here in terms of the actual provision and resources or curriculum. If we really analyze those starting points, I think it can be less painful, because then what you start to do is incrementally grow. Because what I see people do is just go, whoop, we need this, so here we go, throw this in the middle of everything. And it feels a little bit like too much too soon. And I think sometimes if we get more baselined on what our send is doing, what we're actually focused in on, and what's actually our natural next step, I think it can take away some of that pain, and it can actually make it feel more of a part of the culture of your school and not this additional piece that's just been added on because we've had to do something really quickly. I've been asking leaders recently, why do you want to do inclusion in your school? And I get blank faces. Because I say to them after that, I say, that's a challenging question, I know, because actually at this moment, the landscape is saying you have to do it. But actually having to do it and wanting to do it are two very different things. And the having to do it means that you may strategically quit on things when they're not actually part of the plan that you have in your mind. But wanting to do it means that you create a vision and you have a plan in your mind, and therefore you may not quit this as easily. And it's about challenging that piece as well. Why are people actually focused on inclusion right now?
I think it's really interesting what you were saying there about having incremental sort of achievable steps. And I think it's so important as leaders that we are strategic in when we're implementing something and intelligent about the way we do it,
Yeah.
and think about it in terms of achievable steps. But going on to what you were just saying there about inclusion, that's crucial, isn't it? That there's genuine understanding, and that we are genuinely embracing inclusion, and we want to do it for the right reasons for the children.
Yeah.
And then the other stuff is outside of that, as opposed to we're doing this to tick the boxes that we need to tick. Just out
Yeah.
of interest, you'll know loads more about this than me. We're sort of practically working with schools who are going through inspections and whatnot. So what sort of practical stuff would a school need to be really thinking about to be hitting secure in that inclusion area?
So at the moment, obviously, the inspections have just started. And as I was mentioning earlier, I was at a governors meeting and we're going to kind of come back together in February-ish to kind of unpick what we're hearing from our colleagues. However, at this very moment, it's about being clear on your data, understanding your young people, very, very, very key in the framework, being clear about the intent behind any strategy you've put in place. So why have you chosen to have this extra space in your school? Why have you chosen this curriculum choice? Being really clear on the intent. And if you're clear on the intent, you have to be clear on the need. So I think being very clear on your need profile in the school, and being very clear on the intent of why you've done things at the point, put the points in place that you have, being very clear on your data, being clear on the next steps as well, are some of the key things that are coming out at the moment. I will be doing, as I said, more of a reading around the framework in the next couple of weeks, and maybe we'll do another session on
Yeah,
that. But those are the starting points, being very clear. And I
it
think
comes back to processes, doesn't it? Like, as it always has been, high quality processes of identifying
that's
and
it.
then enhancing and adjusting and trying to ensure and measuring and all
Yeah,
those sort of all things that have forever been a
always
sign of
been
high
there.
quality, But
Yeah.
uh, yeah, definitely that the why is so important, isn't it? Like, and that happens a lot in specialist education. I find the sort of why are you in the sensory room with these three children, just on a sort of basic level.
Yeah.
Um,
Why?
just it's on the timetable.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what we learning? What's the point? Why are these children benefiting from this space? But
Yes.
uh, yeah,
Getting stronger on that assessment and identification piece, I think, is a education wide focus. And I'm hoping that the white paper really brings something together with that, because I did a audit of a secondary school last week as well. Wonderful secondary school, very inclusive actually in nature. Just had some change in personnel, blah blah blah. And actually, what the potential thing was for them is, with that change in personnel, that person was potentially very good on assessment, very good on identification. And because that person has moved on, actually that's the bit that's kind of making the challenge in the school at the moment, is that actually they haven't assessed the young people very well, the new children that have come in this year and the year before, and so what they're seeing is the bobblings that they haven't been seeing over the years beforehand. And because it's about assessment and identification, and I think the better we get throughout the whole of education, secondary too, I do get some secondary thinkers going, but why did the primary not spot this? That's a question, but it wasn't spotted. So we all have to be better at assessing and identifying what needs may look like, what blind spots might look like, and then and getting something in place for that.
brilliant. Well, I'd love to chat about assessment next time, so maybe that could be on
Oh,
our
let's
list
do
for
that.
after Christmas.
Let's
But
do that.
thanks again. Nice to see you, Emma. And
You
speak again
too.
soon.
Take care.